All right, thank you, and welcome back to the Pandemic Classroom with Mr. Woods here. We're going to be talking about ancient Greece starting today. So this is a very long unit, and so I've kind of broken it up into really what will become three separate sections. So for today, we're going to talk about early Greece and the early Greek city-states. We'll also revisit the Minoans and Mycenaeans and cover a little bit of that. We will be discussing Sparta and Athens, which are the two very large, probably most well-known city-states in ancient Greece, and we'll discuss kind of what they looked like, as well as the conflicts that they found themselves involved in, both the Persian War and then against one another, the Peloponnesian War. So you'll notice I've left out Greek mythology. We're going to touch that at a later point by itself. Same goes for Alexander and the Hellenistic culture. I've also lumped in some of the invention of medicine and philosophy with that. So we'll be talking about all of that at a later point. So those will be two separate sections. But anyway, let's get started. Right, so once more with Greek geography. We've discussed some of this material before. We've talked about how the Greek countryside was set up. It's very mountainous terrain. In some spots, it would take you days on foot or by wagon to be able to get up and down these places. And so these communities develop in very small, very isolated regions. And that goes into a lot later about why the Greek city-states developed the way they do, why they're not kind of interconnected, thriving social areas like maybe you would find in Persia or even in Egypt, right? There's just not that ease of travel between them. With only about 20% of Greek land being arable or able to be farmed, the Greeks had to colonize. So they sort of branched out throughout the Aegean into the greater Mediterranean, and building on a lot of the stuff that was left behind from the Minoans and the Mycenaeans as far as their trade routes. That's going to be kind of the foundation for a lot of the early Greek trade. So as the Greeks spread, they're spreading what's called Hellenic or Greek culture. And of course, that's based on the Greek hero Helen, two L's, boy, one L, girl. And we'll talk about her as well. So, Minoan civilization, as we've discussed before, located on the island of Crete in the southern Aegean Sea. Of course, they are not themselves actually called the Minoans. We don't know what they would have called themselves. They cropped up somewhere around 3100 BC, and by 1900, they were really coming into their own as a power. But anyway, we named them the Minoans when the archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans discovered the capital city of Knossos and related that to the legendary Greek or Cretan king Minos from the Greek myth, the story of Theseus and the labyrinth, and of course the Minotaur. Tie that in with this fascination of bulls, with the bull jumping, and then the sacred bull is part of their religion, along with this snake goddess. So there's a lot going on in the Minoan culture that we don't clearly understand. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they wrote in a language we haven't deciphered, Linear A. So we don't understand exactly what they're trying to tell us. Now, Minoan civilization will disappear somewhere around 1400, and part of that could be a dry up of trade, part of that could be conquest by the Mycenaeans. We definitely know that the Mycenaeans are going to take over the trade routes that the Minoans had established, so it's likely that there's some type of interaction there, because the Mycenaeans had already been in place for a period of time by the time the Minoans actually fully disappear. So the Mycenaeans are an Indo-European people. We talked about who Indo-European peoples are, how they come out of the Caucasus Mountains and they kind of range throughout the Black Sea region, the northern into the northern Balkans, and of course a group that we just finished discussing with India worked its way down in, known as the Aryans, and into India itself. Now, Mycenaean culture and Mycenaean civilization comes in right about 1600 BC. That's when it's really kind of hitting its height. So they're hitting their height as the Minoans are on their decline. So you're going to have kind of that overlap there. They're very much a warrior people, warrior aristocracy. They have like these citadel fortresses. They have large palaces warrior kings. Even their advanced metalworking is primarily for weapons and death masks. So they're very much wrapped up in kind of the culture of war. Linear B is the language that they write and communicate in, and so we actually understand Linear B, so we're able to really decipher a lot of what we do have left from the Mycenaean Greek people. So we have a fair understanding of what their culture was like and what they were doing. And a lot of the gods and goddesses that the Mycenaeans would have worshipped are gods and goddesses that later Greeks would have worshipped as well. So we're familiar with a lot of that, like Zeus and Athena, right? So we're familiar with who those people are. The Mycenaeans are probably most well known for their role in the Trojan War, which up until the late 1800s, a lot of people assumed was not a real thing. It was a archaeologist by the name of Heinrich Schliemann who actually took Homer's Iliad, the story about the Trojan War that was composed by Homer, and of course translated for centuries. He took this story and, in reading through it, used it as a roadmap to actually discover Troy. Now, Troy is an incredibly old city that's been built over several times. I think the guess is that like the seventh Troy, between 7 and 9, is the Troy of the Iliad. But it's just kind of fascinating that you're able to take a poem and use it to find an ancient city that no one thought was real, let alone discoveries related to warfare, a war that people didn't think happened. So, in short, the story of the Trojan War is a story of love, a story of greed, and in some ways it's more about global conquest and resource control than it is anything else. But in its most basic sense, you have a young man named Paris and his brother Hector, and they are princes of Troy, a city over in Anatolia, or kind of Western Asia, right across the Hellespont, almost from Greece. And so they are in attendance for negotiations, and they're in Sparta near the time of the king of Sparta's wedding. So the king of Sparta is named Menelaus. He's marrying a young woman named Helen, who is regarded as the most beautiful woman in all of Greece. And so, there's goddesses involved. Aphrodite gets involved in this with, give an apple to the most beautiful one of us. And anyway, if we kind of skip through some of that, what you end up having happen is Paris, either through kidnapping or love, leaves with Helen. And so Menelaus, the king of Sparta, goes to his brother Agamemnon, who's the king of Mycenae. And Agamemnon was just looking for an excuse to invade Troy anyway, so this works. And Helen becomes known as the woman with the face that launched 1,000 ships. So Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon send this massive fleet to attack Troy. Battle lasts like 10 years. You have a lot of really well-known events that come out of this. So probably one of the most well-known is Achilles, right? So Achilles is this Greek warrior who's just, incredible. And if you trace his lineage, he's, of course, divine. And he was dipped into the river Styx and held only by his heel. And so he was completely immune to life-threatening wounds except to be struck in his heel. He had a group of ants turned into soldiers known as the Myrmidons, followed him into battle. Of course, they were human. They're transformed into human and then become soldiers. But they follow him into the battle, and he's just phenomenal. He's cutting up the battlefield. He ends up involved in a love story there as well. But his best friend / cousin / maybe lover, Patroclus, is killed by the one prince, Hector. So there's a duel between Hector and Achilles, where Achilles slays the prince of Troy and then drags him behind his chariot around the city several times. making a mockery of it. The king of Troy comes to negotiate basically for his son's body so that he can give him a proper funeral. And so there's a lot that goes on. Of course, you actually end up with Achilles dying to Paris, a lucky bow shot to the heel, maybe guided by Mars even. But there's a lot of different kind of things that go on here. The other most well-known event is likely the story of the Trojan horse. Not really actually in the Iliad itself, but definitely part of it. So Odysseus comes up with this idea to construct a large wooden horse. They use their ships, their remaining ships, to build this. They kind of feint a retreat, and they leave this horse sitting there to the Trojans. This is seen as a peace offering. They think of it as a gift, and they come wheeling this horse into their city. And of course, the Greeks just pour out of the ship at night, or out of the horse at night, unlock the gates of Troy, and allow this invasion to happen. The city of Troy falls, which leads to the founding story, or one of the founding stories of Rome. You had this character Aeneas who gets a sword of Troy, and takes off, but that's another story for another time. But like I said, the Iliad is a very complex read. I'll put a copy of it up on Google Classroom along with this video, but there's definitely versions out there that are easier to understand, and there's movies out there, of course. I know there's a series on Netflix. I haven't actually watched it yet, and I know, of course, Brad Pitt's Troy, which does a good job of kind of summarizing some of the events, although it takes it a little bit out there. And then the Odyssey is the story of Odysseus and his journey home. So Odysseus, the guy who came up with the idea for the Trojan horse, he ends up, when the war's over, trying to get home, and it takes him 10 years because he's blown through all sorts of stuff, ends up on different islands, encounters like the Cyclops and Circe, and all of these different the harpies, or the sirens rather, and all these different encounters he has, and it sort of charts his story of putting war away, coming home from war. He's very concerned about what his wife is doing back at home, less concerned about what he's doing while he's away, but that gives you an idea of Greek culture as well. Anyway, moving on. So the Greek polis, this is the word that we use. It's the Greek word for kind of city-state. So that word is interesting to try to understand if we break it down a little bit. If you think of a city, so for our purposes, think of like Pittsburgh. So if you think of the city of Pittsburgh, now if Pittsburgh was a independent country, Pittsburgh and its surrounding area was its own country, that would be the idea of a city-state. Now, if you think of sports teams, right? Pittsburgh in conflict with like Cleveland or Philly, right? Those are major sports rivalries because they're different entities entirely. They don't want to intermix. They don't like each other. That's the idea of a city-state. So Pittsburgh and the area surrounding it, Cleveland, the area surrounding it, same with Philadelphia. They're separate city-states, and though they work together when they need to, they don't necessarily always like each other, and they're as likely to go to war with one another if allowed as to go to war together to fight against somebody. That's the idea of a city-state. Now, in ancient Greece, you had a couple different parts to this. So you had the agora, which is with this kind of top right picture. This one up here, I'm going to just kind of throw a little star in. That represents the agora. Now, the agora is the commercial center for the city-state, for this polis. This is where you would do everything. There's no better time to try and understand this than like today, under these conditions of almost house arrest. People just want to go out and want to socialize. You want to go out and do things. If you didn't have internet, if you didn't have television, refrigeration, electricity, if you didn't have all of those available to you, you would have to go to the store every day to get food. You would have to, go interact with people. You can't just sit at home and stare at the wall all day. You're going to have to do something to fill your time. And that's what would happen at the Agora, right? You go and you pick up your meal for the day, maybe some food for later at home. Maybe you'll stop and see a show. There'll be some musicians playing, maybe listen to them. Maybe go and socialize with some friends that are there. You kind of spend your days in the Agora. Then you have the Chora, which is like the land surrounding the city. So this could be part of a harbor. It could also be, the farmlands outside, the wherever the food is coming from that supports the city. That's the Chora. And then the Acropolis, of course, that's what you can see really well in this bottom picture here. This kind of fortified hilltop that you can see. This is of course Athens. You can see the remnants of the Parthenon there. So this fortified hilltop is the location for things like temples, which is what, of course, the Acropolis of Athens is. It's a temple to Athena. So this is where the things that were precious to your city would be kept, and they'd be kept safe. It's very fortified. It's able to be defended, and you could pull your surrounding people up onto the Acropolis if you were ever attacked. An Acropolis, upper city, polis being city. All right, so if we're discussing Greek city-states, we might as well go ahead and start by talking about Athens and the different forms of government that Athens had. So first and foremost is the monarchy. So as the most simple form of government, this one tends to happen first. In the early days of Athens, they would have had a monarch, a king, which is what you're meant to see in that bottom left picture. Second would be an aristocracy. So this is slightly more differentiated power spread out to the noble families. That's what you're meant to see in that upper left picture. You see Areopagus there. So this is kind of maybe a transitional period. It could still be considered part of the aristocracy. Could be almost an oligarchy. So the Areopagus is kind of it itself is a rock, promontory rock in southern Athens that's I think it literally translates to something like big rock, but it's the rock of Ares, it's sometimes said to be. And it's almost like a council to the king or to the aristocrats that is sort of a deciding power. They might have had impeachment powers. They might have had some type of trial or veto power. But the Areopagus as like a legislating body could be considered an oligarchy, perhaps. Next would be the tyranny. So this is what you're meant to see in that top right picture. This is where you have an absolute ruler who has taken power illegally, but the people tend to actually support them. So the one pictured is Solon. The other famous one in Athens is Draco. Now, even though this seems like you're putting power back into the hands of one person, it's with the support of the people. So genuinely, you can argue that power has slowly spread out back to the people, which is what it ends with democracy, demos, kratia, power, the people. So this is a rule by the people. The bottom right picture, you can see that. And in Athens, it's a direct democracy. So the male landholding freedmen of Athens got to vote. Now that's only like 10 to 15% of the Athenian population. So it's not representative of the whole group, but it is more representative of the group than one person having all of the power, or 12 people having all of the power, or 30. You're at least sort of diluting the power among the individuals. And it gives people some ownership over what they do as well. One person can't decide everything for your city. You have some say in that. So, as I said, there's a couple major Athenian tyrants to discuss. We mentioned Solon briefly and Draco by name. Draco is an Athenian tyrant. He's most famous for his law code. So harsh a law code, it's said to have actually been written in blood. And we actually today still associate the name Draco with negative things. So Draco gets associated with dragon. Draco Malfoy from Harry Potter. If something is draconian, it's seen as being incredibly harsh. These laws are written down, posted in public, and they are very extreme. Basically the punishment for 75% of offenses is death. So quite extreme. Brings us to Solon, who of course takes over years later after Draco, and he's an archon, which is kind of the power that you have in the aristocratic sense, or the oligarchical sense, is the title, the archon. So he did a few things that are really positive reforms for Athens, even though he's a tyrant. So the outlawing of debt slavery. In other words, you cannot be enslaved to pay off a debt. I think, me sitting here with student loans, I appreciate that. Solon, thank you. Citizens are able to hold one another accountable. So it's not the state that has to charge you for something. Someone else can. In other words, if you do something bad, somebody can actually hold you to account for that. I think that's a positive one as well. And kind of stratifying Athenian society by wealth. Now, this might not seem good, but the way Athenian government worked, you had rotating government positions. People were paid to participate in government. All of those were based on kind of where you fell in a social structure. So having that structure exist, even if it's fairly rigid, is still beneficial to you because it makes sure that you actually get to participate and that you are counted as a part of your society. So, it's kind of why we do the census, right? We do the census to make sure that we know how many people that we can basically expect should be able to participate in government, and who we can call on, and where funds need to be spent, etc. All right, so while we're on governments, talk about democracy for a minute. Democracy literally means rule by the people, or power to the people. So it's a form of government where people actually have a say over what is going on. Now, there's a couple things here that are worth mentioning. So first is that, citizen or people is pretty narrowly defined in Athens, and for a lot of human history. Even still today, we're trying to define that in some sense. So for the purpose of ancient Greece, ancient Athens, a citizen of Athens is somebody who is free. So there's no bondage. They're an adult. They are male, and they have completed military service. Of course, this is probably going to qualify for some landowning as well in here, but I don't believe that landowning is necessarily maybe specified as part of it, although I think that usually comes with being a free adult male. But the completed military service, that you have been taken part in the compulsory military training that is a part of Athenian life. So all adult males are expected to serve. So it's narrow. It's 10 to 15% of the population. You can't actually have a huge portion of your society involved in this, and have it operate like a true direct democracy. So the example I always give, while this is fabulous, and this is really how democracy should work, everybody's vote should count for everything. It's great. It's a great idea. However, take our country today. We have 300 plus million people. So say 100 million people are eligible to vote. So they're adults. They hold citizenship. They're able to vote over the age of 18. Okay. Now, how many things are there to vote on? We currently vote for elected officials. But what about all the things that elected officials vote on? What about all of the votes that go before the Senate? What about the people who take part in smaller kind of legislating. So at the county level, at the city level, even the state, could you imagine if you were held responsible to give your input on every decision that's made that affects you or your surrounding area? So I would vote on legislation in Newcastle in Lawrence County. I would then vote on legislation for Pennsylvania. I would vote on legislation for the country, and then everything in between, the municipalities, all of the different decisions that are made, trade agreements, whether or not we went to war. Think of the amount of votes that would have to take place. I mean, we have professional politicians that spend their lives doing this. If everybody had to be a politician, how would that work in this large kind of landscape that we're navigating? It wouldn't. That's why we have a representative democracy. So ours operates differently. If you lived in a community of 100 people, sure, democracy works great. But or direct democracy rather. But in a country with millions, hundreds of millions, probably not so much. Anyway, discussing problems, debating them, that is all what goes on in Athens, and they think that that's important. That's part of their culture. It's what they do. They debate these things publicly. They present ideas, kind of battle them back and forth before decisions are made. You're going to see a figure emerge really during the end of the Persian War into the Peloponnesian War, a guy named Pericles, who's going to become known as kind of the champion of democracy, and we'll catch up with him here in a minute, but he's quite an interesting figure. All right, so take a minute to just kind of briefly insert this point about Greek warfare. Right around the 6th century BC, the Greeks underwent a change in how they fought. So this is known as the Hoplite Revolution. And it's kind of a changeover in combat, going from kind of light infantry to heavy infantry. So what you see before you in this picture is a Greek phalanx. So these hoplites, armored from toe to head, basically in bronze, wielding the hoplon, so that shield that they have, about 3 foot in circumference, weighed anywhere from 30 to 40 pounds. It's wood sheeted with bronze. This is the armored Greek wall that you would fight. So, they would interlock their shields, overlapping them with the person on their left, basically holding their shield out to their left, locking it in with the person beside them. Hoplites have, the shield. They've got their short sword, what's known as a long knife, the kopis, which means eye cut in Greek. The dory, which is their spear, is about between 6 and 8 feet. That varies, tipped with iron. The cuirass, so the bronze chest piece that they wear, and then the helmet, the iconic Corinthian helm, which you can kind of see in this is all the helms have horsehair running kind of front to back. Now, if you were to go all the way to the left side of a phalanx, the far left, or I apologize, the far right, so the side that's undefended, he's using his shield to protect the guy to his left, but there's no one to his right protecting him. That's where you'd find the commander. They're not kind of center in the line. They're all the way on the right. His crest on his helmet would run the opposite direction. And the reason for this is if you were marching, right, you wouldn't really be able to see his helmet, if you looked over, because you're going to turn your head the entire direction because your field of view is kind of limited to this. So if you turned to look, you wouldn't see his helmet. You'd know that he's marching the same direction as you. But if he turned, you'd be able to see the crest of his helmet. Then you would know that if the commander's turned, we need to swing the army. It's kind of an interesting point for how they maneuvered. Anyway, moving on. Sparta. Everybody loves to talk about Sparta. First of all, the movie 300 is just nonsense. All of it is absolute nonsense. While it might be entertaining, it's nonsense historically. Sparta is a city-state in the southern Peloponnese peninsula that's kind of shaped almost like a hand. It's in southern Greece. They are a very warlike culture, and they're famed for being very intense, very strong. Now, we call them Spartans. They didn't call themselves that. They were the Lacedaemonians. And we have some words that come out of that. Like today, the phrase laconic, or the adjective rather. So, laconic speech is speech that is very terse and short, to kind of mirror what the Laconian people were like. So there's lots of examples of this, but basically they give very abrupt, very short answers, and we'll mention one here in a moment when we start talking about the Persian War. So Sparta conquers the nearby city-state of Messenia, and they enslave the population. Those slaves become known as the Helots, and so they will be in the control of Sparta. It's an enslaved city, basically, and they're going to be responsible for all the food and everything for Sparta, so that Sparta, at least the Spartite and Sparta, the upper class, can focus on building a militaristic society. So they are going to be very focused on strength, power, and valor and heroic honors in battle. So there's a lot of stories about the Spartans and about just kind of how intense they are. Let's take a look at some of that. So Sparta is essentially an oligarchy, meaning that they are a a group that is in power through, I guess you would call it a small interconnected group, um, of wealthy or military individuals. So you have the two kings, you have the Gerousia, you have the Apella, which is like a voting body of people that are eligible, and then the E4s, which are kind of like the representatives of that body. So it's basically the elite upper class. Now these are also people with military experience, people who have served their country. The kings of Sparta are actually elected, so that's all quite strange when you look at it from a perspective of our stance. But when you're in Sparta, that gives you a king to be here, a king to be in your country to rule, and a king to be able to take the armies out. So, if you get involved in a war, well, okay, it's your turn to take the army. I'll control things back here at home domestically. So you kind of have the two branches there. As far as Spartan culture goes, there's lots of stories about how harsh the Spartan training was, about how tough they are. So probably one of the most famous stories is this phrase that's up at the top, "Heton he epitata," which basically says "with this or on it." So this is a phrase that was supposedly said from a mother to her child, who was a young adult, going into battle. She handed him his shield. Come back, with your shield, victorious, or come back as a corpse carried on it. Not a lot of room to be left there. You're not going to retreat. Basically, you're going to go and you're going to fight, you're going to win, or you're going to die. Those are your options. Some other stories. There's the story of this young Spartan boys that used to take pine needles and thistles and stuff them into their mattresses. So, all night when they were trying to sleep, they'd be poked and prodded with these thistles, and it would give them, we can imagine how itchy and how rashy that would be, but it kept them warm, right? Because it kept the blood flow to the outer layer of their skin to try and heal. So that was how they overcame the cold, as they slept kind of rough out under the stars with no blankets or anything like that. Just they would sort of pack everything with thistles to prick them and prod them all night, keeping them warm. So the Spartan training, which is known as the agoge, so that started at about age 7. Young boys are taken from their families. Lots of times they're publicly whipped, and that goes on for their entire lives, and beaten to strengthen them up. It's kind of like social competition, who can stand at the whipping post the longest without passing out. But it's to harden them as people. So they'd have intense physical training for the next, I guess, really 11 years of their life until they're adults, and then they're professional soldiers. They live in barracks, from age 18 to 30. And at age 30 they can finally have their own house, but they're still soldiers until they're 60. 60 is when you didn't have to be a soldier anymore. Good luck making it to 60 in Sparta. People did, but that's a lot of fighting, and they fought all the time. It's not just this major war with Persia. They would fight against nearby city-states. There's this Spartan military force, but they have 60, 70, 80% of their population is made up of slaves. So there's going to be slave revolts that they have to put down. So, you have that as well. There is not a lot of records that exist from Sparta because writing wasn't really a major concern compared to Athens, where we have tons. Sparta doesn't have much. There's no trade, no commerce, nothing like that goes on with Sparta. They're very isolationist. Citizenship is limited really to those male warriors, and so it's very unusual as far as societies go. Now you think of their selection process for children. A child's born and they would automatically be inspected by one of the elders, and if they're seen to have any defects, if there's anything wrong with the child, physical defects, birth defects, even supposedly, even if they're left-handed, right? If there's something wrong with the child, it'd be taken from the parents, set on a hillside, sacred hillside, where they would likely die. Exposure to the wild or animals, or just time, those infants would die. Think about how crazy your society has to be, or how strange maybe your society has to be, for you to sit there as a parent, as a mother, and go, okay, that's for the state. That's what's necessary. Only two ways to get tombstone in Sparta was to die in battle, die in childbirth. Both of those were death in service to the state. That gives you an idea of just how intense Sparta was. Now, there's the story of the young boy who was coming back. Now as a part of the training process, you're encouraged to steal. You'd be underfed. You'd be starved. If you got caught stealing, of course, you'd be severely beaten, maybe even killed. But you had to steal to survive. In fact, your final exam for graduation was to sneak out and kill a slave at night and not get caught doing it. It's basically how you graduated the Spartan military training. But you're encouraged to steal. And there's the story of a young boy who stole a fox. He caught this fox. And he's coming back to the barracks so they can prepare it and eat it. And he sees two guards, so he stuffs the fox up under his shirt. Stands there, holds this conversation with the guards because he's trying not to get caught. And then he just kind of keels over. The guards lift his tunic and see the fox has curled up inside of his stomach cavity as it ate its way inside of him. And he just stood there having this conversation. They didn't know that that's what was happening until they lifted his shirt, and that's Sparta. All right, so we're going to begin talking about the Persian War, which is a series of conflicts, and it lasted, 45 years or so. So it's a long span of time. Now, it's not constant conflict. There's several phases to this, but we'll just kind of dive in. So this all starts over a revolt that occurs in Ionia. So if you're looking at this map here, this region, I guess I'll kind of highlight in blue, is known as Ionia. So it's this kind of province over in came out green, didn't it? Over here in Asia Minor, and the people living there for the most part were Greek. They were ruled over in at least in the city of Sardis by a guy named Aristagoras. So Aristagoras was a Greek ruler who is kind of in league with the Persians, who controlled all of this region. Now, he had fallen out of favor with the Persian king Darius, And so, and by the way, side note, right, Darius is the successor, or the eventual successor to Cyrus the Great. You had Cyrus, and then for a half a minute Cambyses, and then Darius, this powerful Persian ruler. So he kind of comes in as being out of favor with Darius, Aristogoras, that is, and so there's this revolt that occurs. The Athenians and the area of Eritrea, they send troops to support their fellow Greeks that are revolting against the Persians, and the Persians are upset about this, so there's going to be retaliation, and that really kicks off this war, this conflict. All right, so the first example of that retaliation that occurs is the Battle of Marathon. So this is 490 BC. Persians, coming from the mainland of Persia or in Asia Minor, invade Greece in retaliation for the burning of the city of Sardis. So this is about 3-4 years out, at least, from the burning of that city. So a bit of time has passed, and Darius has organized an invasion force. About 26,000 Persians come by sea to invade, and their basic goal is to go to Athens, since the Athenians helped in this revolt, and burn the city of Athens to the ground. So the interesting thing here is you've got this, really the first major encounter at least, between the Greeks and the Persians in this war. Now the Greeks knew that this invasion was happening, and Darius thought that he was sending enough troops. He's sent 15,000 more than the Greeks have, and believing that's probably going to be enough. He knows that his cavalry is really kind of the showstopper for his army, and if they get off the boats, then the game's over. Well, the Greeks had kind of positioned themselves in this mountain pass, sort of built a wall of troops, and the Persians come off the boat and they crash into the Greek line, and then the Greeks do something that we now call a pincer movement, or a double entrapment movement, where the center of their line starts to fall. The troops in the middle, under the command of Miltiades, the Greek general, begin to retreat. So the Persians, thinking that they have successfully kind of pushed the Greeks back, push forward deeper into this pass. Now the flanks, the two sides of the Greek force, stay strong as the center retreats. So you kind of get this shape that's almost like a bowl. And the Persians are the cornflakes, right? They're just filled into this bowl, and then the bowl circles all the way around until the Persians are almost fully enveloped, and then this invasion just becomes a slaughter. The Greeks are just butchering the Persians. The location that the Persians chose, this beach of Marathon, they never even get their horses off the boats. There's just not really a chance for them to. So the numerical advantage has been cut, the technological advantage has been cut, and when it comes to troop-on-troop conflict, the Greek heavy infantry, the hoplite, are just more successful in combating the Persian troops than the other way around, and so the Persians lose. Now the Greeks, or the Athenians rather, push the Persians back onto their boats, and the Persians go, well, you know what, if their army is here, we'll just sail around to Athens and burn the city. So the Persians load up their ships and they sail off toward Athens. The troops here at Marathon run by land. They travel 26 miles to get to basically the city of Athens. And when the Persian troops show up to invade Athens, there's that same army that just crushed them 26 miles away, standing there gleaming in the sunlight, waiting to fight them again. And they turn around and go home. We call the marathon race today a race of 26.2 miles in commemoration of the Battle of Marathon. Right? So these troops in armor ran from Marathon back to Athens, that 26.2 mile journey, to prepare to fight off another invasion. And today we kind of have that name, Marathon race, in memory of that. After this, Themistocles, one of the Athenian commanders is going to really start pushing hard, saying, you know, if this type of thing could happen again, next time when Darius comes back, he's not going to come back in small scale. It's going to be a major invasion. We really have to be prepared for this. And he's going to really focus on funneling a lot of his efforts into getting the funds available to build an Athenian navy. Thankfully, he does that, even if he does so through some trickery. Brings me to the legend of Phidippides. So a lot of people believe that the marathon race is named for Phidippides, this runner who ran from Marathon to Athens and announced that the Athenian victory and then dropped dead, which is not exactly the case. So Phidippides was a runner, a messenger for the Greeks, for the Athenians. Now, he didn't run to Athens. He actually ran to Sparta, several hundred miles. He did not drop dead. He carried his message to, well, I believe, dropped dead when he made it back to Athens. But so he ran to Sparta to convey the message that the Greeks needed help. Spartans were in the middle of a religious ceremony and couldn't be there yet. They said, well, you know, we'll get there when we can. We're almost done. Once we wrap this thing up, we'll be there. And of course, they show up just in time to, you know, see the Athenian victory and realize they're not needed. So go back home. So a number of years later, we have what's known as the Battle of Thermopylae, or maybe probably more famously the last stand of the 300. So there's a few things to clear up first. This is the invasion of Greece by Xerxes, the son of Darius. So Darius has died. His son Xerxes has taken over. And basically the goal is, you know, let's go in and we'll crush this for once and for all. So the polis of Greek, the city-states, have formed what's known as the Hellenic League to sort of repel this invasion. The Persians and the Greeks are going to kind of meet at a very narrow mountain pass. You can see here on the map at Thermopylae, where there's going to be this battle. So the Greeks are outnumbered. They are severely outnumbered, totaling, I think the best numbers say around 7,000 Greeks. The most conservative numbers for the Persians, somewhere between 250 and 300,000, although I've seen that number as high as 2 million. So, you know, I'm kind of trying to draw some understanding out of this as best I can, using historical sources and whatnot. So, and I did the same for the previous battle. I've seen that number anywhere from 2,000 Greeks against, you know, 50,000 Persians to 11,000 against, you know, 12,000. So I kind of tried to meet out those numbers where it makes sense. But Battle of Thermopylae is so famous that I want to do it justice. So I actually have a couple points I'm going to pull out for you from straight from the source. So this is the Histories by Herodotus. So the Greek historian Herodotus wrote the history of really all of Persia, but he also includes these wars. So two things I wanted to catch here. He gives us some rough numbers on the Greeks, and of course this is from his perspective. Even though he lives in Persia, he's mainly trying to give a favorable account to the Greeks. And so here's some of the numbers he gives. He says, this is Book 7. The Greeks who stood against the Persian king at Thermopylae were as follows. As regarded heavy infantry, there were 300 Spartites, 500 from Tika and another 500 from Mantinea, 120 from Orchomenus in Arcadia, and 1,000 from the rest of Arcadia. There were over 400 from Corinth, 200 from Phillois, 80 from Mycenae. These were the Peloponnesian contingents, and then Boeotia supported 700 from Thespiae and 400 from Thebes. So he goes on to talk about some of the other groups that are outside of the region, like the Phocians and whatnot, that are, you know, also providing support at this battle. So that's worth noting. And then the other part that I like to bring up here, you just find it quickly, is when when the Persians are preparing to I guess fight the Greeks. So Xerxes has kind of his battlefield advantage set up, and he's preparing to go to war, and so you have this interaction. So you have this Greek spy working for the Persians by the name of Demaratus, and so he says, and I quote. He sent for Demaratus, the son of Ariston, who had accompanied the expedition, and asked him about everything in the scout's report, item by item, in an attempt to understand what was going on with the Lacedaemonians. I told you about these men before, Demaratus said. When we were setting out for Greece, you laughed at me then, and found my ideas about what would happen in this war absurd, just because I take pride in nothing so much as trying to be honest with you, my lord. But listen to me now. These men have come to fight us for the pass, and they are getting ready to do just that. It is their custom to do their hair when they are about to risk their lives, but you can rest assured that if you defeat these men and the force that awaits you in Sparta, there is no other race of men on earth that would take up arms against you and stand against you, my lord, because you are now up against the most noble and most royal city in Greece and the bravest men. So he's basically setting the stage for this combat that's going to occur, and there's several days leading up to this, and the Median troops go into combat against the Greeks and are destroyed. The immortals, the kind of Persian stormtroopers, go into battle against them and again are just cut down. This battle goes on for 3 days before the Persians actually discover, either they're told or they discover on their own, a route that goes out around the mountain that they're kind of sheared up against. You can see it up here in this corner. The mountain of Koliodromos. They find their way around it, end up surrounding the force. The Spartans send everybody else home, and of course spend the last day fighting there. King Leonidas of the Spartans falls early on the third day of battle, ends up with his head cut off, paraded in front of the Persian army. Meanwhile, out at sea, Themistocles, that Athenian general, has put together a small navy, and he's having quite a bit of success fighting against the Persian navy. He keeps them from being able to land their troops in behind the sort of land army, and is successful in holding the pass until, of course, he has to retreat as well to sort of follow the land force. He's also going to be successful in evacuating the city of Athens before the Persians show up to burn the city like they had originally intended. So later on that same year, after the Persians have burned, the city of Athens to the ground, the Athenians have been evacuated to a small island known as Salamis. The Athenian navy basically sets up itself as a kind of an enticing treat for the Persian fleet, which sweeps in and is then drawn into this narrow strait once again and destroyed. The Athenian navy is able to cripple the Persian fleet, and the Persian supply lines are basically put down. Meanwhile, on land, there's the Battle of Plataea going on. Instead of 300 Spartans, you have somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 Spartans. The entire Spartite has come out, plus the slaves, the helots wielding weapons, and you've got kind of that middle class out there, and plus, all the other Greek city-states have come together. They're able to push the Persians back. This is seen as a Greek victory. Now, arguably, the Persians were just tired of investing money into this war. But this really is kind of the decline of the Persian army, the Persian Empire even. And within 200 years of this, there's going to be nothing left of them. They'll be completely gone. Well, even less than that. I guess you could say about 150 years. And so, really, when this war ends, you see a couple leagues get created. So the Peloponnesian League was a group that had been in existence since that Hellenic League started, led by Sparta, Common Defense, etc. The Delian League is created as sort of a response to that here with the Persian War. They are a mutual defense pact centered on Athens. Because of the victory, they rebuild the Parthenon, or rebuild the temple to Athena, known as the Parthenon. It's commemorated to the Battle of Marathon, and it's just massive structure. And then you have Athens and Sparta really developing as two powerful city-states, and Macedonians up in the north getting a little bit of land, starting to think of themselves as something. They don't matter yet. This is a map that kind of gives us an overview of sort of what happened, and I like this because you can see how large Persia is, and of course this stretched all the way to like India. So their empire is massive. They're drawing from all parts of the world. And then you see what Greece really was over here. Just a couple small areas. Some of them are neutral or on the side of Persia, and it just made life very difficult for those Greeks that were trying to push back against the Persians. So anyway, quite interesting. Now, the Golden Age, or the Golden Age of Pericles, is something quite interesting to talk about. So this is a period that happens right in between the two wars. Mainly occurs in Athens. The Golden Age is led by, or it's often known as the Golden Age of Pericles, who was the leader of Athens during the time. He asserts the importance of citizenship, focuses on quite a few different things, including kind of the idea of glorifying and beautifying Athens, extending the power of legislature to the people, giving them some power and authority. He says, and you can see the funeral oration taking place down below. It's kind of a massive funeral oration given to troops that had died. One of the things I like he says is he says, "Our Constitution does not copy the laws of neighboring states. We are rather a pattern to others that imitate ourselves. Its administration favors the many instead of the few. This is why it is called a democracy." Interesting, powerful words. So, women, of course, tended to marry relatively young, mainly elements of Greek or Athenian life for childbirth, and they had limited social rights. Slaves, they were primarily domestic, not a lot of agricultural slaves, at least in Athens. Now, of course, in Sparta and some other city-states, that was quite different. It's just a part of the ancient world. They didn't view the slaves as subhuman, the way we might think of slavery here living in the United States and having the kind of American slave system in our minds. Slavery was a component of the ancient world, and it was really a hey, we conquered your people, we now own you sort of thing. And if the roles were reversed, that would be how it was. Of course, nobody enjoyed slavery, at least nobody who was enslaved enjoyed slavery. So there are slave revolts that occur. There are, obviously some who escape that pattern, that cycle. It's not a positive part of human history. I'm not making that argument, but I am saying that in the ancient world, it was a lot more palatable than it is today. It was kind of an expectation. If your army was beaten, you knew what was going to happen to you. Art and architecture, talk about naturalism. So this is, ironically, it's not how things actually appear. It's not how they naturally are. It's how they should be, or how they would be if it was perfect. So take the Parthenon, for example. The Parthenon, when you look at it, looks like a perfectly symmetrical building. It's perfectly rectangular. But if you actually measure it, it's actually skewed just a little bit, just a minor amount. And it's not perfect. Some of the steps are actually wider than others, and the building itself, the lines aren't perfectly parallel. They actually kind of flare a little bit. And the reason for this is they wanted it to appear perfect. So if you think about a perfect rectangle, if you're standing at the front, you're going to experience that kind of vanishing point where things appear more narrow in the distance. The architecture of the Greeks here defeats that. So it looks perfectly rectangular when you stand inside of it, even though we know that's not the case, right? It's not mathematically. It's interesting. A lot of optical illusions there to go into naturalism. You see the same thing in some of the carvings. The discus thrower by Phidias, or by Myron up there at the top, and the statue of Athena by Phidias, the actual sculpture, the reliefs. It's all meant to look perfect, even though that's not, you're not going to have every Greek athlete looking like a Greek god. It's just not going to be the case. Talk about columns, Greek architecture. You've got the Doric. I always look at these in complexity. The more complex the word, the more complex the column. So Doric, very base, very very square. Ionic. You see the scrolls or the ram's horns at the top, and then Corinthian. Oh, that's got to be fancy, right? So you look at the top and you can see the leaves, and of course, there's other types of columns out there, but those are the main four. You go to a major government building today. I know, driving through Newcastle, you can see this. A lot of different courthouses. Ionic columns tend to be the common ones, but you can find others as well. That's just part of even today, even our construction. Greek drama, the dramatists of the time. Of course, this is all going on during this golden age. You've got Sophocles producing Oedipus Rex, Aeschylus with the Orestia and the Persians, Euripides, the Trojan women, and Aristophanes, the clouds. So drama is any type of play. Those first three that are up there are all tragedies. The final one, the clouds, is a comedy. It's all drama. It's all meant to honor the Greek god Dionysius, who is sort of like this god of wine and mirth. We'll talk about him later. In Rome, he has a little bit of a different meaning, but in Greece, he's seen more as kind of fun and happy-go-lucky. Sophocles writes Oedipus Rex, which is it's like a three-part story. Oedipus Rex being only one part of that, and that's the story of this young man who was left out basically to die, where he's kind of taken in and taken care of by a couple, and he finds out that there's this prophecy that he will one day kill his father, marry his mother. Now, of course, he doesn't want to be any part of that, so he flees and ends up finding out that later he was actually with kind of caregivers, guardians, not his actual parents, and he kind of enraged kills a man at a crossroads who turns out to have been his father. Finds out once he reaches the city of Thebes, the woman mourning, the queen, since he defeated the Sphinx, he gets to marry her, and she's mourning because her husband was just killed at the crossroads. Yeah, he finds that out after he has a couple kids with his mother. Goes on to gouge out his eyes. She kills herself. It's tragedy is a fair term there. And then the Orestia is a story about Agamemnon, Agamemnon's daughter, and Trojan women is sort of a perspective of the Trojan War of what was it like for Helen to be recaptured and taken back to marry Menelaus? What was it like for the other women of Troy during the sacking of Troy? And you can imagine it was not pleasant. So I'm not going to dive too deeply into this since we've already sort of discussed it, but those stories of Homer, they would have been oral traditions. They would have been composed and performed orally. You would have memorized this, and it's not just only a few people. Like if you were an upstanding member of society, you would have memorized these stories. But so, top picture I mentioned before, Achilles dragging the body of poor Hector, the Prince of Troy, around the city. That's what you're seeing in that. You've got the Trojan horse on the bottom left, or the middle left. Middle right, you've got Odysseus and his men sneaking past the Cyclops. And then the very bottom is Odysseus listening to the siren's song. So, there's a lot that goes on in these different stories. And like I said, I'll find copies and link them to you all so you have them. to enjoy, but definitely take a look at those. Other forms of poetry. Um, so I like to mention this guy. He's not so famous as some of the others, but Archilochus of Paris. So he is kind of a failed soldier, and his poetry mocks his own failures in battle, which I always found interesting. He talks about retreating or running away from the battle, and how standing there and dying just seems silly, and etc. Sappho, the top picture from the island of Lesbos. So she's very historic. She's known for composing love songs, love poems. There's even some connection to, perhaps she was writing some of these to women. And then these poems give us insight into the culture of the people, into what their lives were like. And so, them being composed orally, that the actual content of them gives us an idea of what was important to the Greeks and how they went about their lives. All right, so we're going to talk about the Peloponnesian War, which is the war between Athens and Sparta, more broadly between the Peloponnesian League and the Delian League. Delian League being led by Athens, Peloponnesian League led by Sparta. You can see if you look at this map here, all of the red region is controlled by Athens, which makes sense. They're a major sea power. They're going to be working with territory with coastline or on islands. You look at the orange, controlled by Sparta, of course, mainland territory, since Sparta has this large army. There is a sort of truce with Persia at this point, kind of a working truce, at least between Athens and Persia, and even to some degree Sparta, although Sparta and Persia are going to get quite friendly as time goes on. So the Peloponnesian War takes about 27 years to wrap up. The war eventually breaks out, and I like to refer to it as the war between the elephant and the whale. You think of the large sea mammal, the whale, large land mammal, the elephant. It'd be difficult for them to fight one another because they exist in entirely different areas, right? Now, there's going to be a large siege that takes place on Attica, where the city of Athens is. The Spartans basically lay siege to the city. There's some type of epidemic that takes place. A lot of times I think it's typhus, but sweeps through the city, kills about a third of the population, including the leader Pericles. That's pretty early into the war that takes place. The Athenians fight a bit of a dirty war. I like to talk about Milos because when they show up, the phrase that's often given, the Milesians want to remain independent or out of the battle. The Spartans don't give them, or the Athenians don't give them that choice. The quote, I think, is the strong do what they will and the weak suffer what they must, basically. So the strong get to do whatever they want and the weak have to suffer the consequences of that. So this war is going to turn in Sparta's favor because the elephant is going to find its way onto a boat. Basically, Sparta turns to Persia because they need a navy. They essentially buy a navy from Persia or rent one, and they're able to defeat the Athenians at the Battle of Aigos Potomoi. And from there, the Athenians are going to be forced to surrender. 404 BC, the Athenian government kind of collapses, and Athens is, basically punished for starting this war. Their defensive walls removed. Greece is divided. Athens is going to be ruled by tyrants, Spartan tyrants, for a period of time, which is going to just cripple basically everything they built up until that point. In the Peloponnesian War, a lot of times people celebrate the Persian War because the Greeks, preserved democracy. Well, anything that the Greeks did in the Persian War to preserve democracy was certainly undone when the Athenians lost the Peloponnesian War. So, as we mentioned, the Spartans are going to win the Peloponnesian War, but they're not actually going to be able to unite Greece together. Greece is going to remain relatively divided. The Polis are going to decline. those alliances that exist are going to fragment, and the Greeks are going to be pretty vulnerable as time goes on, open to invasion, leading to actually an eventual invasion by a fellow by the name of Philip II. But more on that later. So I want to thank you all for joining us. This has been our session on ancient Greece, talking about the peoples and culture, at least some of them. And we will pick back up with our next episode on the Greek mythology. Until then, have a nice one.